Hi, everyone. We are just getting started. Welcome to the Contino webinar regarding data maturity in the public cloud. Thanks for joining us. We are waiting for a few more attendees to show up. So far, we have a dozen or so, and we'll wait a couple more minutes, and then we're going to get started with introductions, and we're going to take you through the report, and we'll hope you have some questions to ask us and some insight that you can derive from this. And of course, this report is available online for you to download, so please, if you haven't already, go and do so. Alrighty. Thank you for joining us. I think we have enough attendees to get started. It's about a minute past 11 or so. I am Thomas Barton, head of the data practice for the US region. I'm joined by my peers, Ben Simonds and Mark Pybus, who's the lead of the practice for EMEA, and Ben, who we call Data Ben, for his expertise in all things data. Magic comes out of his fingers when he helps us out in that area. So we're going to present right now. I'll just give you a couple of intro slides, a couple of points to go through, and then we're going to jump right into the report. So let me show my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. I'm going to take you through the report right now. So again, Tom Barton, head of the data practice for the Americas. I'm lucky enough to have joined Contino over the last year or so, having done a stint as a head of data strategy for a very large asset manager tied to an insurer. I was an enterprise architect for quite some time, as well as the head of data integration for a large pharmaceutical company. Ben?
Hi, I'm Ben Simonds. I'm our head of analytics for Contino, so I look after our internal data, and I also help out on some of our engagements if people need some data crunching. So I helped out Tom a lot with the processing the data from this survey and putting together some of the insights that we generated from it.
Excellent. And Mark?
Thank you, Tom. So yeah, I'm Mark Pybus. I head up the practice in Europe. I've been with Contino for its journey for the last 3 years. So I spend my time helping our most important clients with their most difficult problems in the areas of data strategy, data governance, and the full data stack.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about Contino. So Contino, we lead the area in cloud transformation in heavily regulated industries. We're lucky enough to work with well over 450 people, 6 offices around the world, and have done several DevOps engagements, really almost more than any other professional services firm running today. We have over 150 customers, some of the largest banks and enterprises in the world. And we do nearly everything within DevOps, including data ops, CI/CD pipelines, and from a data perspective, we focus on data engineering, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and everything in between, of course, across all 3 clouds. And really, you know, the whole point of the research was that we found a gap in public cloud research with regard to data. We've seen a lot of hybrid patterns at our client sites, and we wanted to validate the actual happenings on the ground, the practicalities of integrating and building infrastructure in the cloud and then getting your data there. Right, so the other thing was the quantitative measure of this practical experience would be really valuable, we believe, for our clients and for those out in the world today, which is why we wanted to share the report. And we think there may be some misperceptions with regard to how data in the cloud is both joined, moved, analyzed, and ultimately produced for value over time. So to that end, I'm going to take you through the report. Again, this is available online for you to download at any time, so please go ahead and do that. So often we think about data in the cloud, and I think you've seen the news in terms of the security of the data in the cloud, right? A byproduct of the cloud journey, something that people sort of have to do, obviously, because you're building cloud infrastructure. But really, I think that's not the case. Nothing could be further from the truth. We know that data is really the most focused reason as to why people move to the cloud. Data is the center of your applications. Data is the center of your universe when it comes to both analytics and the customer success journey. So, we wanted to check that our hypotheses in terms of cloud adoption, both the widespread cloud adoption and the use of data in the cloud, could be verified in some measure. And so this research report just takes a look at maturity across several areas. We have looked at a couple things ranging from the maturity of data itself, the AI ML journey, and ultimately how people perceive the value of what they've done with data in the cloud. And we've asked 272 IT decision makers from across the world to contribute to this. They are unique respondents. And to that, I am going to ask some of my colleagues to talk about the uniqueness of that profile and what it means in terms of this report. So I'll ask Ben to take a look at this and relate it to you.
Yeah. So as Tom said, we had about 272 respondents across a variety of industries. In terms of the types of industries that we got, the biggest group was from information technology companies, also a large set of companies from financial services, from healthcare, and then from a variety of other industries, which come from principally the three regions that we work across, but as Tom says, really across the globe. So a large chunk from EMEA and Americas, and then some more from APAC region. And that marries up with the kind of clients that we work with at Contino, which are principally in the areas of financial services, government, a bit with utilities, and a range of other companies as well. In terms of the type of person responding to the survey, we saw a fairly large number of people from VP of IT or managers at IT level right up to C-suite level. So we got a good range of people of different levels of experience responding to the survey, which was nice to see. And in terms of the length of time that people have been with their company, the bulk of people had been there between 3 and 10 years, although we saw some people who have been there for shorter times and people who have been with their company for a very long time. The nice thing about that is that the bulk of people will probably have had some experience with more than one company, and that helps to lend some subtlety to how people rate the maturity of their current organization and things like that. About half of the companies that we surveyed had over $1 billion in annual revenue. And similarly, just over half had about 100,000 employees or more, though we got a number of responses from smaller companies as well.
Indeed. Now, I think from the tenor of the company that we work with and the type of person that we work with at that company, we skew towards financial services organization in general. We're heavyweight there. In addition, we have a fair amount of experience from the government municipal area, as Mark can attest to in the UK. And from an experience standpoint, with the people that we're working with, it typically tends to be that VP or C-level type person that we interact with, sometimes a director person if we need to go down a little bit lower, but that's in general our profile of the type of customer we work with. When we think about the findings, I think Mark had a couple of great insights here.
Yeah, so looking at these, so it's really interesting, taking a look at the data and then drawing out of that data some trends, and also then starting to match them to what we see on the ground as well. So we've got that first one there, 63% of organizations consider their cloud data programs mature. Now, that is the respondents self-scoring themselves. So we could quite possibly say that in reality, it's a little bit lower. Now, I don't know whether to be pleased or happy that somewhere over half people think they have a mature data program. But if you go down and look in a little bit more detail, so if we go down here to number 4, 90% are using data science. They are driving value. Now, I think that's really important because I think we have now got to a stage from a maturity point of view that if you aren't using data science in your products to make your customer experience better, your competitors are, and you are therefore going backwards. We've also got indications here of some of the complexity of building data platforms and building them in the cloud and making use of data in the cloud. So if we look at number 5, security, I was actually really pleased to see that people had recognised that as a large challenge. Number 2 was probably the one that stood out quite a lot to me, because even though we do work with a lot of complex organizations that are going down a multi-cloud strategy, I wasn't quite expecting it to come up as over 50%. So it does match what we see on the satellite field, and potentially here it is because, you know, there was some quite large enterprises answered this survey. Point number 3, to come back, the most popular business benefit is cost savings. That's good to see. Slightly disappointing, because if you're only doing data to save costs, you're probably missing a trick as well. Data should be treated as an asset. Your data platforms, your data capabilities should be enhancing revenue, not just saving costs. So I would hope that if we were to run this in a few years, that isn't as popular then. And just a final point from this slide, point number 10, only 16% have fully realised the business benefits from moving data to the public cloud. And you'll see on point number 7 that, you know, a third of the reasons was actually just to move data to the cloud. Data flow can become, and without the correct skills and the correct experience, realising the benefits from that investment can be difficult. And I really hope that as an industry, we can move that 16% further up and make sure that all the benefits that are there are taken as well.
Right. It's a really great point, and I have to say that if you think about that, if you take away nothing from this webinar, look at that metric and say to yourself, this is the beginning of the cloud, still the beginning of the cloud journey. For all the hype and the fact that people are moving to the cloud, unless it proves to be valuable, right? Unless our direct business benefits from that journey, then really what is it for, right? It may be an IT-centric move, and we're focused there right now, but trying to drive business value out of these assets is the ultimate goal of utilizing that data to its best potential. And if only 16% of our respondents have realized that, and that's indicative to, you know, the larger industry, then I would say that we have a lot longer to go in terms of that data journey, right? Yeah. And so then we'll take a look about how enterprises are using data in the cloud, just to tease that out a bit more. And as you look at this information, right, I should point out that there's a lot of inference that we were able to pull, and we've structured the data set so that we were able to align it with other facts so that it made more sense. So we did the usual public cloud service provider survey, right? What are you using? As you can imagine, Azure and Amazon came at the top. Snowflake was in there from an independent cloud provider, data provider as well, since this is a data-focused survey. There's something to be said here, and I've had a couple questions come in from clients as well as interested third parties who wondered why the breakdown for Azure and Amazon was so close and why it seemed a little overweight Azure. Don't forget that a lot of enterprise productivity suites are based around the Office 365 and thus Azure platform. So in a multi-cloud scenario, which this is, you know, representative of, we will often see that the other cloud is almost always Azure, in addition to AWS or Google or IBM, et cetera. Simply because their productivity suite has always been Office. They made the journey to Office in the cloud or Azure in the cloud, and that counts as a cloud where your data is, right? Look no further then Power BI and the fact that you can change your spreadsheets into data sources. And that is a good representation of where and why people are using Azure for data progress. And when we asked about the strategy in terms of data storage and how it relates to it, we still saw that mix of multi-cloud strategy, some data on-premise and some in the cloud. And then about 38% claim to be quote unquote cloud first, meaning as they built solutions, they were always going to go there. But the majority, I think it's safe to say, still live that hybrid model. And if you looked at our biggest, most successful respondents, IT and healthcare, of course, healthcare, I believe, would be one of those big proponents of the hybrid model. So too financial services. So as half of enterprises have more than one cloud provider, that doesn't mean that all the data is there, right? About a third of people said that just about 50% of their data was in the cloud thus far. And that, again, is true to our experience on the ground, as Cognizant and Contino have a very large client base that we work with. We see that for large regulated data sets, trading data sets, which can be quite voluminous, some HIPAA-based data sets tend to be on-prem and still haven't made the full journey to the cloud at this point. Not to say it has never occurred. We have seen it go cloud native for sure, but I would say the majority of those clients will have a hybrid model for at least the next couple of years. All right, so the findings clearly demonstrate the widespread adoption of the cloud, but we know that there's some gaps in there, right? It's the multi-cloud strategy, the hybrid strategy, but we ultimately think there's a long way to go for true adoption and real data maturity in the cloud as we go through the regulatory, security, and other scrutinies that you need to go to. And then there's the fact that you need talent to run all these things, unless you have people who are experts in AWS data services, all the Azure data services, et cetera, or GCP, BigQuery, whatever your flavor of the month is, you will not be successful in that transition. So let's talk about that defined cloud data strategy.
Yeah, so around 60% of respondents said that they had a defined strategy for data in the public cloud, and another 34% said that they were currently working on developing that. So there's a very small number of people still either putting their head in the sand or say we don't need a cloud data strategy. That's not an opinion that is flying anymore. And so everyone is kind of working on going on that journey and developing their strategy. In terms of where people are on that journey, we saw a pretty wide spread of responses. So the majority of organizations are now at a stage where they're saying they're reasonably well defined or better. So most were in a maturity level of 3 or above on a scale of 0 to 5. But there are still a number of people in those early stages working on defining and doing the foundational elements of building that strategy. So we've got a good spread of respondents, and that's been interesting to pick apart in terms of how that level of maturity interacts with the other questions that we've asked. In terms of who's responsible for that data strategy, we got a variety of responses. In a lot of cases, it's multiple people. So you'll see those blue elements of the charts on the right show where we have multiple people being responsible for a cloud data strategy, which is kind of what we hope to see in terms of people collaborating on that and making sure that all the right stakeholders are represented. In terms of who that burden sits on as a single person, where it does rest with one person ultimately, most commonly we saw that was with the CIO. And they were the most sort of frequently mentioned person as having that responsibility as well. Although we're seeing a sort of a growing role of the CDO or Chief Data Officer role there.
Indeed. I mean, just anecdotally, I've spoken to 3 new Chief Data Officers in the last 8 months at very large financial organizations. They are quick to recognize that this now may be a new function and something that needs particular focus outside of just an IT focus, right? Data has its own challenges, and I think we're all very aware of the need to operationalize it in the name of the business, not just as a functional aspect. You know, we're not just saving the data and holding it on a data store somewhere in the cloud. Ultimately, it has to be utilized, and the CDO is emerging as a role that is best placed to do the utilization.
Yeah, I think, Tom, that's a good way to move on to this slide as well, because it's not only that people are hiring a CDO, because as a role we have seen it around, but the focus of that is changing, because I think previously the CDO role has been seen more of a compliance and almost locking away data, and that role has changed or is changing, and now it's much more about driving the data use in an organization and maturing the organization in its approach and its use of data. And that's really important, because data does permeate every aspect of a business and the operations of a business. But putting that role at the board level and driving the correct way of working with data, the governance around data, but crucially the actual uptake of the use of data, and alongside that, obviously, the maturing of data and various data platforms, which increasingly does mean a move into the public cloud. But we do see that that differs across sectors. One of the things I like to call out is government. So it's come across 50-50. And I would like to see that as glass half full, not glass half empty. Because what we've seen on the ground, especially across our major markets, is governments have really stepped up their game regards to being able to use data. And obviously, some of that they have self-driven. You know, we've had in Europe, we've had GDPR and various rules come in around data. But actually, at the top level of our governments, they've realised that they need to be making better use of data. And most governments do have a lot of data as well. So again, it's one of those where it's 50-50, but that is definitely increasing at pace. There's a few laggards in here, non-profit, unfortunately. I was heartened to see that most respondents, if you look here, have actually, on a scale of 0 to 5, ranked over 3. Industrials, though, is one that again it stands out. And having worked a little bit in that sector as well, it's like there is so much opportunity there. And even if we just started with cost saving, it is definitely worthwhile. It's a little bit of a change of mindset. And we are just starting to see that they are looking and bringing forward data programs, starting to bring in roles like CDO as well.
Right.
Financial services, we obviously see a lot of traction there. Interestingly, it only ranked itself at 57%. You know, and if you look at the financial services market and the difference between some of the incumbents and then the new wave of fintechs, one of the ways you can tell them apart is the use they make of data, use they make of tools like artificial intelligence and machine learning in things like fraud and granting credit. The differences there are stark, and again, it's one of those where if you're not doing that well, your competitors are. We've seen a lot of disruption by forward-thinking fintech and data-led firms. I would like to finish on this slide by just talking about the fact that we've got, most organisations have a strategy. 36% are saying that they're only just implementing their public cloud data program. There is still an awful lot of work out there to be done. And those companies that do bring in that forward-thinking CDO that can build a good team, a good approach, democratize access to data and the use of data throughout their organization. They are the ones that will mature quickest. They will leapfrog their competitors, and they will reap that for years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good point. I think that the takeaway is, if you're behind, good news, everyone else is behind, but I don't think it's going to stay the same for long. So definitely you want to accelerate, your journey there, right? And so then as we take a look at the role of data science in that journey, we also asked our respondents how deep they were in terms of data science experience, if they use analytics to support outcomes, and then sort of interpolate in between what that meant in terms of the engagement. And we have a bunch more data around data science if you're interested, so please hang around for that. It's great that 90% of people are engaging in data science. Fantastic. And anecdotally, that's what we hear, and we talk to our customers about it a lot. But as we look deeper into what that means, a third of people may be engaging in data science, a third of those organizations, but they only have a single data science team to do so. So in a multi-tenant, multi-BU organization, that really isn't encouraging if it's only one of your business units that may be focusing on that. The teams that are successful in larger organizations tend to have multiple data science teams. So that other third, which is, hey, we staff it at a BU level because of the need to know the business operations and how that works, especially for things like feature selection. When you think about machine learning, that's very encouraging. So we're happy to see that. And then there's the other third of people who have just a single data scientist. They may be small organizations. There is a slight correlation there. We think that is encouraging as well, but less so in terms of the need for a multiplicity of people to sort of attack the much larger problem, right? Ultimately, you have to have a defined and supported strategy to do this. Data science can't be done in a box, but you have to have a sort of test and learn approach against a defined use case. And then you have to also understand what it's going to take to do the rigors of analysis, hypothesis testing, algorithm selection, data validation, et cetera. As we've spoken to clients about this, they've come to understand the need to dedicate skill sets. These aren't just data engineers. They're a hybrid skill set that's sort of in between what a data engineer is and what an analyst used to be, a business analyst used to be, someone who is data forward and data focused with the wherewithal to know what the business problem is, but the technical expertise to then apply it to an algorithmic solution. Right, so then as we think about how they're using AI and ML in the cloud, Ben had some really neat insights here.
Yeah, I think when you pair this with what we've just seen on the previous slide and the statistic that around 60% of the respondents that responded to our survey had either a single data scientist or a single data science team, this kind of tells an interesting story about where we are on that sort of exponential journey and how companies are using data. So around 63% are doing AI and ML in the cloud. Another 20% or 18% are developing that. But what we see is a really interesting spread in terms of how many projects people are delivering to production, what level of scale they're able to operate on. So the median number of projects that our respondents had undertaken was 7, which is pretty small. But there are a small number of respondents that had project numbers in the dozens or the hundreds. And that says something interesting about as people scale up and as companies are able to do more and more, the number of projects you're able to deliver on is really growing quite quickly. So there's a lot to play for in terms of getting that kind of first mover advantage and being able to get to the forefront of that area quickly. And in terms of the kinds of benefits that people achieved, there's some interesting trends here. the one that people most frequently reported was cost savings. And as Mark says, that's maybe not actually the most exciting benefit that you can get. But when you combine some of the other responses and look at what the pattern was in what people were reporting, the most frequent thing that actually comes up is something with a customer focus. So we've got increased customer retention, increased customer acquisition, and other benefits, and things that are on later slides are things like personalization and improving marketing and customer 360 type stuff. And the story that emerges from that is that customer-centric view is really where AI and ML really helps enable you in a particularly important way. And the data that you're using for that in the public cloud is obviously very hugely unique and yeah, important to your organization.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is a surprising, or in some cases not surprising focus to use AI and ML on, like customer churn models, et cetera. But then when you look back at the projects, right, and know that the greatest number of projects was done by technical companies or large financial institutions, you know, the Googles, the Amazons of the world, of course, will outstrip anybody in terms of some of their models that they deploy for you know, their search product or their catalog, et cetera. But then the financial institutions similarly will be using this, and this is our experience, for things like KYC/ML, know your customer, you know, fraud models, et cetera, risk models for investments, you know, models for customer acquisition, et cetera. There is a pattern here, and a lot of that has also to do with the size and scope of the data with which some of these AI ML projects can be applied to. And that's why when we spoke about the last slide about the need for a use case, a defined use case, it's really important to have that defined use case and to have the data set that supports it, right? So a great idea with, you know, a couple, you know, 1,000 lines of data isn't really going to pan out from an AI ML perspective, especially if you need to train that model. That's where you need to think of in terms of your approach to AI.
Yes, so, and I think that if you look at that type of use of data, so artificial intelligence, machine learning, it is getting forever easier, but it's on the right hand side of a scale from a data maturity point of view. So we do see organizations, actually, if you move on to the next slide, Tom, we do see organizations that want to start by doing a data science project, or they need to get into doing machine learning, and we sometimes have to gently say, you know, you don't know where your data is now. And I think one of the classic things is that they want to be able to predict how many widgets to build next month, but they don't know how many widgets they built last week or today. It's there's sometimes a certain amount of gentle, okay, then from a data maturity point of view, can you try a little bit of walking before you do the running? And we're seeing that in the figures here. And you do get a mixed experience of the benefits you get from data science, depending on where you are in terms of data, maturity as well. So we do find organizations that actually sometimes aren't doing machine learning because, to be frank, they are a little bit scared of it. They don't understand it, which is the corollary to those that just want to do it. But what we also see a lot of is people can do small scale data science, and they can work with the well-structured data that they may have, and they're important problems that they can address easily, but then they can't scale. So they can start to deliver business benefit from machine learning, but then they start to run into walls. And you know, it's there where we start to talk about data ops and then machine learning ops, and start talking about the actual data science process and automation within that. And we see it here. You do get benefits, but it can be easy to do a few projects. It can be complex to do a lot of machine learning at scale. And as more organizations understand how to do machine learning well, we will see forever more benefit being delivered.
Right.
So I don't know, Tom, about your side of the pond as it was, but certainly across the last couple of years in the UK, the investment that has gone into this area has been massive. It's still, though, those rewards can be patchy because you have to learn how to do it well, how to do it in a repeatable way as well.
Right. I would 100% agree with you, right? You have to learn how to do it well. It has to be a repeatable pattern. You have to scale it. And that's what we do, right? So in general, our experience with clients has been to help them get there. We didn't talk about it a lot, but Contino specializes in sort of like a squad paired programming training model where we will help organizations get up to speed with these skills, and then they can typically hopefully run some on their own. But certainly my experience here has validated that, that statement as well, Mark. I appreciate it. So from an expectation versus reality perspective, though, I think we had some surprising results here.
We certainly did. I think, as we have mentioned, cost saving is often one of the reasons given. And that is quite true. I think, as I've said, you are missing a little bit of a trick if you're just looking for savings. It's good to see that people are realizing a range of benefits here. If you look up here in the top right-hand side, that innovation is equally important. Or to a certain extent greater, because you can use data to inform what you know about your customers, how you treat your customer, what your product design is like. You can start to innovate how you serve your customers. You can start to train models to automate much more of that customer journey. In terms of the areas where firms have fully realized, this really shows that everybody in some format is actually on quite an early stage of that journey. So even where firms have recognized that they are quite mature in their use of data, they still have a lot of benefits coming to them. And there are always areas where almost there is plenty of low-hanging fruit to go and grab, but then there's a massive long tail of benefits that you can get from your data platforms.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, and you can sort of see here that the use cases are biased towards the customer. So we're talking about servicing those customers better, being able to market to those customers better, to be able to communicate so much. If you use your customer data one, you can go from talking to your customers to talking to a customer, and that is a real step change in how you can engage there.
Right. I think you're right. Using platforms to drive further down the route of customer engagement, unique experiences, and then unique recommendations is clearly a trend we've seen across clients, even financial services clients, to whom traditionally this has not, been their forte. And you'll see that this is a multiplicity of answers, right? So this data set here, you could select more than one. And the fact that it was always, skewed towards customer platforms, and even payments, I would argue, on the revenue side, it's still a customer experience, right? They're still paying for something. They're still engaging with you at some level. Ultimately, that is helping them drive revenue up as well. So I can't agree more. There's a multiplicity of benefits here. Cost savings isn't the only one, and we're happy to see that customer experience piece. And I think it's an overflow, by the way, from the DX UX side, which we have seen at customers too. we've seen several modernization efforts. And as those modernization efforts have come to fore, both from, again, digital UX perspective, what is the one thing that underpins all the UX experiences and the DX reinvigoration? It's data. So that makes me happy that we believe there's some correlation there. I think there's some technical expectations versus reality that we were kind of surprised with. So, what were those? And we asked across a data set of, established technical use cases that we have experienced and that cloud platform service providers are promising. Ben, you did a lot of the analysis here. Do you want to talk about some of these numbers?
Yeah, there are some interesting stories that came out of this. So you'll see in the top left that the most frequent use case that we saw was cloud data migration. And some of the things that you might have expected to see sort of high up the list, some of the sexier names, things like Internet of Things, things like blockchain or data lakehouses or things like that, are really kind of at the bottom of the list. And there's a story that is kind of emerging from that, which is that a lot of the enterprises that we surveyed and that we work with are kind of at the foundational stages of that journey. And you can't do the exciting blockchain thing or the exciting data lakehouse or Internet of Things thing until you have some of the foundational stuff of actually moving your data into the cloud and making sure that it is validated, that you have the right governance around it, that you have the right pipelines to get it where it needs to be in time. And so that's a lot of the stuff that we saw at the earlier stages. There are also some interesting trends. We're seeing more respondents say that they're working with data warehouses as opposed to things that were very popular only a couple of years ago, so data lakes or the lake house architecture. So that's kind of a move to getting some of the value out of those cloud native data warehouses that are becoming more mature and more popular, things like Snowflake, things like BigQuery. Once you have the flexibility that those offer in terms of working with a variety of data and at scale, and the kind of the cost efficiency that they offer over some of the older solutions, those are kind of really popular solutions. Yeah. And in terms of the challenges that people faced, there were some interesting insights here as well. So security and organization came out on top overall, but if you dig into the data and look at what maturity stage people are at throughout the journey and what kind of challenges approach at different points in the journey, something that came out was kind of early challenges are often around what data have we got, how do we secure it, and how do we get the governance in place. Later challenges are really more about often about talent and making, as you grow and as you need more data scientists or more data engineers, how do you make sure you keep that talent pool there to support your growing scale, and around maintenance as the volume of data you have in the cloud and the volume of things that you're doing with that data grow, then obviously that becomes more of a concern. So that was kind of interesting to see as well.
Yeah, just again, more validation that this journey is multifaceted, and that organizations have to respond in a variety of ways, organizationally, talent-wise, and of course those use cases that the expectation versus reality are, I think, being faced by nearly everybody. And the blockchain one, I was surprised at, but most of our customers, although they may be interested in the technical concept of blockchain, the implementations have skewed mostly toward big data, machine learning, AI, and ML. As we talk about the governance piece, I think this is a subject near and dear to Mark's heart in terms of how data is governed across. Yeah,
I think it's really interesting to know how much of the need to have data strategy has historically and continues to be driven by the compliance needs of the organization. Most organizations share that. It doesn't matter what sector you're in. GDPR, CCPA, etc. are important. And most regions now of the world have some sort of privacy rules and some sort of governance around the collection of data, but also the storage and processing of that data. And that now has been going on for quite a few years, you know, and it continues to, but you know, you're actually now starting to see a second and third wave of organizations that have been able to meet the regulatory and governance needs in some way and tick all the boxes they need to be able to carry on trading. And now realizing that that approach and sticking process and processes aren't going to cut it anymore, and they actually do need to bite the bullet and mature in that area. But one of the things which is getting increasingly important and is a little bit newer is from a data residency point of view, and this can be of critical importance when you're looking at cloud as well. So increasingly, regions of the globe are starting to be very clear on where they expect their citizens' data to be stored and to be processed. And all of this is very important, and having a lot of input into the cloud data strategy. It's viewed sometimes as a risk or a compliance burden, but the more forward-looking organisations turn it to their advantage as well. You know, some of these regulations, especially when you start to talk about those which are specific to a specific sector, so looking at healthcare, looking at financial services, the forward-thinking organisations and recognise that if they can get to grips with this, if they can meet those needs really well, then they can start to free up their use of data. They can start to innovate, and in actual fact, they can start to get ahead of their competitors in whichever market they are in. So if you're clever about the enterprises I've seen which do this well, they turn what can be an obstacle and a hindrance actually into a position of strength. And that's one of the reasons why cloud data governance and getting it right is absolutely critical to really mature in your use of data in the cloud.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. We're working with several financial institutions at the moment who have some technical challenges that they're looking to get through, but they're shaped by governance issues that they want to secure and get right first, and as the exact right way to do it to enable them in the future. Ultimately, you know, as we sort of get closer to winding this down, we start to ask ourselves and our customers about the cloud data journey, and is it worth it or not? We hear this from our customers all the time, right? Do they understand what it means to put data in the cloud, the underlying costs to both manage not only the infrastructure, but the people and processes that go along with it? And then have you actually realized the business benefit from the work that you've done so far? You know, and a little surprising, right? So the almost half of just partially realized the business benefits they set out to achieve. You know, again, there's a partial understanding of the costs for the data in the cloud. Again, our experience on the ground has validated this, that the reason we are asked most often to go into client sites and talk about the cloud data journey, part of it is FinOps, which is to say financial operations in the cloud, and how they manage the data that's there from a cost perspective and from a velocity perspective, since we've seen in the previous data set, right, that they're going there for cost savings a lot of the times. And even if they haven't, some of our clients have been surprised that when they made the cloud data journey and they've started storing their data there and operationalizing their data in the cloud, there were costs that came with that they did not expect, either through large processing, you know, few costs have to do with actual storage, since those are traditionally and historically very low. Most of it is processing and the velocity and the relationships that they have to have with other cloud providers or network connections to get the data there in the first place, leading to additional expense that was not forecasted. So we absolutely believe that part of this process has to be an education as to what it takes to do the full cloud data journey, and know that you will only realize this. There is a correlation between the people who realize the full benefits and who have a full understanding of what the costs associated with data in the cloud are, and that real world success is been validated by our experience. When we talk to clients, when we help them execute a plan and make sure that their use cases are set and that they're ready to go and that they have the FinOps journey planned out, they're almost always more successful than they would have been if they were just to do a straight shot migration pattern, or one of those strangler patterns that you typically see out there that give you a great indicative way to move and operate on some of that data, but don't always tell you what the underlying costs are, and the journey that you'll have to take from a talent perspective as well. There's some really neat information that Ben pulled out in terms of business realized by industry. You want to talk about it?
Yeah, so on the industry front, we see kind of a mirroring of what we saw earlier with what level of maturity people are at. And obviously, the higher level of maturity that you're at, the more likely you are to receive those benefits and fully realize what you're going after with your cloud data strategy. So we saw some of the industries where they had overall the highest level of maturity, unsurprisingly have the highest level of realizing those benefits that they were going after. So information technology and healthcare were two industries that really stood out as having a higher level of maturity, and we see them at the top of the pile when it comes to getting the benefit out. The other thing that is really interesting is how that interacts with the size of the industry. So whilst we had a fairly small number of site samples, like right at the tail and the head of that distribution, so the very small and the very, very large, in that mid-range, there's quite a clear trend, which is that the bigger the company you are, you actually have an advantage in terms of realizing the benefit from your data. And that really comes from, there is a big advantage in having more data, in having a bigger data set to train a model on, or in having just a bigger server farm that you need to get off of, or whatever. You may be thinking, I'm a huge part of a huge organization, we're slow to move, how can we be as agile as these cool tech companies in San Francisco or whatever? But actually there are ways in which you have a big advantage by being a bigger company. There are economies of scale, and there are greater value that you can get out of having more data that actually can give you an advantage over your competitors that you may not think that you have in that respect. And as Tom was saying about understanding the economics of managing your data in the cloud, actually that does bear out a correlation with achieving those goals as well. So we saw that the more of an understanding people had of the economics, the more likely they were actually to achieve the goals that they set out to achieve as well. Obviously, one of those goals was cost reduction, so there's a fairly unsurprising link there. But I think the overall story is that the better you understand the full picture of your data, and not just what the data is itself, but also how you're operationalizing it, how you're controlling the cost of it, more likely you are to be successful in general. So there's some interesting kind of trends going on with that data there.
Yeah. This was again one of the best, I think, one of the best discussions we had around, this entire survey. And it's great to see this again validated, and it's great. It's a great point for any program that you run. Bring this data set to that program, and help that you use it to validate the fact that if you don't understand your data, you understand what you're getting into, you have a lower chance of success. So certainly something to think about. Finally, Mark is going to bring us home in terms of, I think, what we've seen in our recommendations to clients.
I will certainly kick us off, but feel free to jump in here. So some final thoughts on the findings that we've taken away from this, and a little bit of insight from what we see working with multiple clients in this space. And if you look at these 5 takeaways here, there is a theme, and that theme is across number 1, 3, and 5. Because that's a fact, that isn't just about what capabilities you have with data in the cloud. That is actually about the use of that data and the alignment of that data within your organization. So we've all heard or seen or worked on those large-scale data projects that really deliver the benefits there, often because it was a data project, it wasn't a business project. And that goes the same for strategy as well, is that your business strategy should actually incorporate your data strategy. They should align really well. And I do harp on a little bit, but I think it was, I think it is Amazon that when they want to launch a new product, they insist on knowing how data will be used to make that product better. And that cuts across every industry going, you need to be making use of one of your most valuable assets, which is your data. But to do that, you need to look at your other valuable asset, which is your workforce. And number 5, in actual fact, you have to have the talent and the culture to be able to do this. But those people and that data need to be able to join. So point number 3, democratizing access to your data and the tools there. Organizations that overcome all the hurdles there is over the use of data, the storage of data, the collection of data. And it's not actually about putting the data in the hands of your internal users. It's actually about giving them the ability to get the insight and the knowledge and then take the actions on the basis of that, which improves your business. Data is actually just your first step. We've talked a little bit about cost control here. The best teams that work in the cloud with data take a FinOps approach. So step number 4. So they really integrate together the financial managers in the organization and the cloud developers as well. And they have a shared knowledge and a shared approach to managing their costs on there. And sometimes by managing, that actually might mean spending more because there's more benefit to be had. So allowing a budget to flex upwards as well. I've left point 2 to the end, partly because I've already spoken about it previously, but I think it goes without saying, if you don't get your data governance correct, you will fail.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, these trends we are seeing at clients today. So data democratization, I've probably already had 3 conversations around data catalogs, and governing the data to that catalog. So I can't stress enough that, I think that is part of a successful organization. That is it for our presentation. We are happy to entertain questions in the last couple minutes we have. And we are also happy to follow up at any time. This data set is customizable by industry. We can certainly do that for you if you'd like to get in touch with us and talk about what it means for things like financial services, manufacturing, et cetera. That we can customize the data view for you within that area and deliver it to you so that you'll have a sort of working knowledge of what it means within your specific sphere of influence. Any questions?
I have seen a question come through on the chat, Tom, which is interesting. And that's, if we were to run this in the future, if I've got the phrasing correct here, what extra question would you like to ask?
Yeah.
So gaze forwards a little bit.
Yeah. We limited ourselves to, I think, 22 actual survey questions plus the qualifying questions as to what your organization looked like. I think I would have gone down deeper in terms of the AI/ML journey. We actually had a couple questions out there that we tossed. We were hoping that inference would give us the answers we needed. For me, that continues to be one of the most interesting aspects of this because we hear so much hype about it in the industry. And I think the reality on the ground for us delivering for clients is different from the hype. So I would have loved more information about that and to drive deeper. I don't know, what about you, Ben?
I would have loved to see some questions about how people are using that data. So I think that the idea of how companies are using data catalogs is really interesting. And also, I would have loved to see kind of maybe some estimates of what proportion of the workforce is enabled to kind of access that data and query it, you know, on a self-service basis. How many of them are doing that on the day-to-day? Something like that, I think, would have been really fascinating.
Agreed. Yeah. That utilization piece is pretty, I think, is pretty up there. We talked about the data catalog. Skills. I think I would have loved to ask about data skills within your organization, but I think that's kind of hard to assess sometimes, right?
Is I think looking forward and picking up on potentially an early trend, it's I would like to ask a question around which organisations are starting to migrate their data from one cloud to another cloud. So we are starting to see that as well. You know, so we talked here about those firms that aren't that mature, but those which are mature are actually starting to move clouds as well, or start to almost surf clouds to find the cheapest storage or the cheapest processing. So I would like to learn more about that. I've also noticed we are at the top of the hour. Like that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for attending the webinar. This has been Contino's presentation about data maturity in the cloud. Please do not hesitate to contact us in the future if you have any questions. And again, we can customize this data set for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.